Everybody. Welcome to what is the first of a series of programs we're going to do on Lebanon. The reason we're doing it is quite simple. As the bombings in the south continued even after the October ceasefire, and the Israeli occupation continued and intensified after that ceasefire in October, we became concerned that there was not attention being paid to Lebanon. There would be a rocket from Lebanon into Israel, and it would be an outrage. But what Israel was continuing to do in South Lebanon, demolishing homes, consolidating the occupation, actual bombing raids into Beirut, the Bekaa, and even in the north, there was no reaction at all. And then when this became a full-blown invasion and occupation, less attention paid because there was a celebration of a ceasefire with Iran. So this lack of attention to Lebanon, what was happening to its people, to its country, just the acceptance that Israel might occupy, as if it were logical, that it occupy a 6 to 8 mile strip inside South Lebanon, something that actually done before back from the 70s all the way up to 2000, that was a logical response to this was just so disturbing that we thought attention needs to be paid. And I was concerned, as somebody who's been working on these issues for years, that we'd achieved some success with folks in the liberal community and on the left over Palestinians and being outraged over what was happening to Palestinians. But that outrage didn't seem to extend to Lebanon. It was as if the Israelis had been able to inoculate themselves that Lebanon just was a playground where they were free to operate without repercussions. And so we wanted to do this program. Maya and I talked about it, and what we conceived of was an opening session like this to talk about the problem in the beginning, and then shift to a number of villages in the South with people here in the States who have family, people who have family in Lebanon, and then also bringing in people in Lebanon to be able to give an eyewitness account to what was happening to their homes, to their villages, with pictures, to get a sense of the fact that parts of Lebanon are being made into Gaza. We did that about Gaza. We have a program where we've actually brought families of people in Gaza, people who've come from Gaza, to meet with members of Congress, but we felt an obligation to do the same with Lebanon. So I want to start tonight. We have Maya is with us. Her village is one of the ones being affected, and we did want to talk to her. We have Rami Khouri, who was actually my boss for a number of years when I wrote for the Jordan Times and then the Beirut Times, the Beirut Daily Star. It was. He was the editor and somebody I respect enormously as a scholar and a political thinker about Lebanon, about Palestine, about the issues involving the Middle East. And Ralph Nader, who is, I just can't tell you how much I feel about Ralph Nader. I call him one of the transformational figures of the 20th century, and so fortunate to know him and support the work that he's done over the years. So, Ralph, you had me on your show week or so ago talking about this issue of how Lebanon is being ignored, um, and how the plight of people across the Middle East is not treated in the same way as what happens to Israelis, or the fear or the anger or the frustration of Lebanese here in America is just not treated as a story worth talking about. Can you just share with us your feelings about this whole issue, put it in perspective for us?
Well, I do. Thank you, Jim and Maya and Rami. I do as an outsider, as I've told Jim, I focus on corporate crime and not so much foreign policy. But I have some perspective as an outsider, which comes down to the word astonishment. It's really astonishing to see how the Lebanese American community here reflects the divisions over there. So there isn't a unified response. I read the statement by Ed Gabriel for the task force on Lebanon, and like 80% of the condemnation was on Hezbollah, reflecting, the Maronite type view, in Lebanon, and a minimal impact on Israel, which of course created the conditions for Hezbollah way back with all of these invasions and beating up on the Shiites and who weren't defended by the Lebanese army, and they had to have self-defense, and there was no indication of that. And so I called up Peter Tanus, who I've known for years. I said, Peter, look, you got high-level people here. You got General Abizaid, retired. You have church leaders. You have business leaders. Demand a meeting with Trump. Trump hasn't met with Lebanese Americans, and he likes to meet with people like that. And he has an ambassador to Turkey, Barak, whose family comes from Zahli, who could quite easily arrange such a meeting. Then you get the White House press corps. You tell people that you are a constituency that has access. Now I know it's hard to stomach sitting in the presence of a mega criminal terrorist called Donald J. Trump, but he's in the White House. Just like we dealt with Stalin against Hitler. And so you start at the top, and that will bring people from all over the country to focus on this. The problem with making recommendations here is that everybody over there in Lebanon who would like to have the government go to the World Court, the General Assembly, the World Health Organization, is afraid of being bombed. I mean, the AUB and the Lebanese University, I mean, they're terrified that they're next because they're dealing with a total rogue nation that doesn't even know how to spell the word law and has expelled Judaism from its constituency of restraint inside Israel. So they're all afraid to make these types of petitions. Now, Israel has used Lebanon as an experimental war crimes laboratory. Lebanon happens to be the only country in the world that got hit with the pager explosions, which Leon Panetta, on national TV, former Secretary of State, instantly called a war crime. And Lebanon has had more of its share of phosphorus, another war crime product, than Gaza or anywhere else. But you don't hear about it. So I would suggest high-level meetings. Go to the Hill, meet. You have to meet people. Have you ever seen a mass demonstration by the NRA? Have you ever seen a mass demonstration by AIPAC? Of course not. They don't mess around with that. It's personal, immediate contact with the 535 men and women up there who put their shoes on the way we do, and their staff. And they know a lot. They know who the doctors are, the lawyers, who they play golf with, who their business associates are, who they went to what school with. And it's direct personal attachment. And that's what the Lebanese community is not doing. They're not going to these people and saying, you are not giving us equal time, you are bigoted, you don't even want to listen. You can shame these people because, the groups who are demanding this are pretty established groups. I mean, Abu Zaid, for example, has a circle of retired generals who got awards at the annual dinner of the Lebanese task force. So I would suggest having a Lebanese recognition day where you pool all these things in one day all over the country. You have demonstrations and you sort of aggregate it in a way that the press can't completely ignore it if it just dribbles out a little bit at a time.
Let me go back to one of your earlier points though, Ralph, and that's the divisions that exist. One of the things that bothers me is that it's not just a problem of the media. It's a problem within the community that some Lebanese lives are viewed as more Lebanese or more valuable or more important to attend to than that of others. Um, I'm Maronite. I grew up in the Maronite church, and still go. But been to Dearborn and know the Shia community there and the villages who were literally expelled, evacuated back in the 70s, the late 70s, and came to Michigan. I know the personal pain they feel. I know the Sunni community. I know the Palestinian refugees from Lebanon. Um, and yet, when each group sort of goes into its own corner, and the people you're talking about in the Trump circle are people with a particular perspective, but they are part of the problem that separation of our needs are greater than their needs. Our solution is important, not their solution. That there isn't a vision of a unified Lebanon, of where everyone's hurts have to be addressed, where everyone's grievances are as important as anyone. That's absent in this conversation. How do we elevate that? How do we create a unified voice?
Well, you put your finger on it. You can't expect people who have opposed each other and disagreed with each other within the Lebanese community to suddenly unify out of the institutions that they're working from. What you need to do is you open up an office in Washington where people come from all sources, lobbyists and people can know the media and know how to talk to politicians, and they shed their sectarian backgrounds in a unified way to put the whole Lebanese disaster front and center in the U.S. Now, there are 86,000 U.S. citizens who live in Lebanon. That's more than any other Middle East country, by far. There are 219,000 American tourists came to Lebanon in 2024. So you have a lot of contacts, a lot of people putting their hands up in the air. We want to do something, but we don't know what to do. So the way you do it is you don't try to get the Arab American Institute and the ADC and the Task Force on Lebanon institutionally. It's nice if they do their own thing. And the task force, by the way, is full of Lebanese Americans who are Republicans, as you know, and active as well, and donors as well. But let them do that, fine. But what you need is a war room, in effect, to use a bad metaphor, in Washington that has laser beams on Capitol Hill, on the State Department, on the White House, and the media. For example, I talked recently with Karen DeYoung. She's a foreign relations editor, very, very responsive, and she knows what's going on over there. She hasn't heard from anybody on Lebanon, nor has John Hudson, who's the reporter who does bylines with her down at the Washington Post. Christoph has been to the West Bank. He's been to the Middle East. I don't know if he's been at all to Lebanon. He should be invited. He goes right away. You know, he's hands-on. He'll go into the refugee camps. He'll go into where the rubble is, and he gets an op-ed in the New York Times regularly. You know, he's a syndicated, and that suddenly, you know, brings the attention to the editorial writers and so on. But what needs to be done in immediately, like a 6-month effort going right through the summer, is this war room focusing on all this, and you'll be surprised at some of the reactions that you'll get from Capitol Hill. Like, why hasn't there been a congressional hearing? Well, it's because the Republicans control Congress. Okay, how about a shadow hearing? There's nothing that stops the Democrats ranking on the foreign relations and armed forces from having a committee in Congress. They have prominent witnesses, and the press loves it because they hate the Republicans up there. The press will cover it. There are 500 full-time reporters on Congress, ditto heading itself. So that's what you got. It begins to aggregate in a way. Your paper, Jim, says it all. You know, footnotes and everything. That's the thing. We don't have to discuss that now. It's all, you put it all down there. But
let me go to.
I have no idea why the General Assembly hasn't been asked to do anything.
Yeah.
Other than the Lebanese government is totally terrified that Israel is going to bomb anything that moves and anything that doesn't move. By the way, this latest move by Israel is no longer fake self-defense. This is an extension of the Israeli regional empire. They want a slice of Syria. They want a slice of Lebanon. They want that water. As you told me, they want that gas extension, natural gas, off the southern coast of Lebanon. And they have designs on Jordan in order to push the Palestinians into Jordan. This is a regional empire who is controlled and collaborating and mutually controlling the American empire. It ought to be talked about that way. It's
Listen,
an
Ralph,
empire.
thank you
It's expanding.
I see that the paper that Ralph was referring to, the AAI paper on Lebanon, is now in the chat. If you have questions, please go to the Q&A. And for either Ralph, Rami, not either, for Ralph, Rami, or Maya, three, not two. And let me go to you, Rami, about little of the history, but also focused on this issue of the divisions within the community and the difficulty of finding a voice that can be heard. Because the guys that have a voice are the guys who are pretty happy with what's happening right now, unfortunately. That's what it seems to be. Tell me what your thinking about this is.
Thank you, Jim, and I'm delighted to be with you and Maya and Ralph, and thanks to the AAI. I'm not a Lebanese citizen, even though I spent half my life in Lebanon, and I consider myself Lebanese at heart. But I've spent enough time there to understand the power and beauty of the place, and it's the depth and the meaning, the human meaning of it. And when I look at Lebanon, and as I know it, and I see what it has suffered throughout my life. I was born in 1948, and I first lived in Lebanon when my dad was working with the UN, with UNRWA, in 1950, 52. I remember, and then we used to go every summer there, and then I lived there again in the 60s. And when I finished college in the US in the early 70s, I was there. And then again for 16 years recently at AUB and the Daily Star. So I've been in and out of Lebanon most of my life. But I noted once when I was making sort of historical comparisons that almost every period that I've been in Lebanon, there has been a major American military presence, either offshore or in the country. But that's just kind of cute. But the reality is that the country never from Lebanon from its birth was not given the opportunity to develop as a country that could showcase and capitalize on the tremendous human capital that it has, the skills. The Lebanese have an extra gene, I think, for creativity. We know they have an extra gene for having a good time and for enduring pain and other things. But the Lebanese have never been given a chance to actually achieve their potential. And partly this was a consequence of it being created at the hands of capitalist, orientalist, colonial powers in Europe. And many of the Arab countries have the same problem. The difficulty that Lebanon had was the internal splits were very difficult, and they were constantly stoked from outside, from Israel, from Arab countries, from European countries, wherever. But the point that I was asked to mention a little bit, talk about the U.S. role and what should we ask of the United States. And I think that the point about the U.S. reminds me of two quotations I want to give you, two incidents. But the first, I should say that the Israeli attacks on Lebanon can be traced back to the 1950s, even 40s and 50s, and the Zionist and then the State of Israel's desire to have parts of Lebanon as part of Israel goes way back, even back to Ben Gurion, and the early Zionists talked of the Litani as the natural border of northern Israel, ideally, and things like that. But the attacks against Lebanon and incursions and taking little pieces of land, that started in the 40s and 50s, 2 generations before Hezbollah was born. But in recent years, In the eyes of the US government and in the eyes of the West generally, because of the media's complicity, Lebanon has come to mean Hezbollah terrorism. And you saw it in the statement the other day that came out, the alleged Lebanese Israeli American statement. It was pretty much written by the State Department in Israel, I think. But it basically mentioned Lebanon only as a problem of controlling the terrorist group Hezbollah, taking their arms and
Mhm.
putting all the arms in the hands of the Lebanese government, which most people agree to in Lebanon. But it didn't capture any of the realities, the human realities, or the rights of the
Let
Lebanese.
me just make a point on that. If you can objectify the opponent and reduce them to this kind of stereotype that we're not fighting Lebanon, we're fighting this group, um, then you have a free hand to do it. The human faces of those who suffer, the homes that got demolished, the families that are blown to bits, the apartment buildings that, yes, may have one person you were targeting, but kill another couple dozen people in the that doesn't become an issue for them. That's how it's cynical as hell, but it works. I guess it's been working for them for decades.
Yeah, it's been working for a century. The Zionist groups and then the State of Israel, with the close collusion of the West, first the British colonial powers, and then later, after the 1950s, the United States were complicit in this. They basically looked at Arab countries, uh, in most cases, either as people who didn't matter or who were a threat, who were bad guys. And historically, if you go back since the 1930s, Zionist propaganda in the State of Israel and parroted by the American mainstream press has mainly uh, equated the threat of the day in the region, if it was Gamal Abdel Nasser, or if it was Saddam Hussein, or it was the PLO, or it was ISIS, or it was Iran, or it was somebody. The main threat kept changing over time, and that threat was always equated with the worst thing that people in the West knew about, which essentially used to be the Holocaust. For most people around the world, and with good reason, the Holocaust was just such an enormous crime. Everybody knows about it. So they would say that, Arafat knew Hitler, the Mufti in Palestine knew Hitler, and these people are all Nazis, and the West would buy this up because they didn't know the facts. But that has changed a lot now. People understand the realities of the Middle East more. But I mentioned that only to mention that Hezbollah is the main force that people talk about now when they talk about Lebanon fighting with Israel. But historically, from the 40s and 50s, we had all the Lebanese people who were trying to defend their young country from the threats from Israel. Many Christians, Druze, Muslims, all Sunni, Shia Muslim, all kinds of people in Lebanon were always defending themselves. And that reminds me of the quotation, which is a very American quotation, of course, which is Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty or give me death." Why do people fight to defend their country? Well, they fight because it's human nature. A subjugated person, occupied person, denied their humanity, will fight back, resist to regain their humanity. But the second quotation I want to give, which I think is important, is the American government's role in this situation, and the government and the mainstream media. You can't really separate them. The progressive and liberal, very new media, they're very different, but historically, the mainstream media and the government are one group in the US, and they work closely with Israel. So you can't separate the Israelis from the Americans in this. And the Israelis are doing now in Lebanon what they did in Gaza, which is creating total destruction, desolation, mass killing, making it unlivable for human beings. And they're doing the same thing in Lebanon. And the the analogy of this is the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the American nuclear bombs. When the U.S. threatened to do that, they said that they were going to. Uh, Let me find you the quote. They were going to carry out prompt and utter destruction. That's the quote. The U.S. Declaration, Potsdam said prompt and utter destruction an utter devastation of the Japanese homeland would happen if Japan didn't surrender. And that's what they did. And these are the exact same words that the Israelis have been using, especially the defense minister, Katz. He's talking about, he says, we're going to burn all of Lebanon and have a Gaza scale destruction. That's the quotation the Israelis use. So you
Mhm.
see the parallels historically in terms of the vast scale of the violence that the Israelis are prepared to use, and the determination of the Lebanese to fight back. Now the fighting back is mostly done by Hezbollah, but it varies over time. So I'll just end by mentioning a few bullet point headlines. What is the U.S. role? Why is the U.S. complicit? What should we be concerned about in the U.S. doing? And this is because they're so close to the Israelis. Well, they're first complicit because for the last 50 years, they've done nothing about allowing Israel to expand its settlements, occupy land, bomb anybody it wants at will. And this has led to this level of ferocity and barbarism that we're seeing now. The second problem the U.S. is that it's been complicit in the Western colonial desire to keep Lebanon weak so it doesn't threaten Israel. They don't want a strong Lebanese army, a strong Lebanese government. And that's why Hezbollah emerged. That's why Hamas emerged in Palestine, because the governments were unable to protect their own people. The third problem from the US is that it has never been a fair mediator. It has mediated many times, and the reason it's mediated is because the people thought it might be able to control Israel or temper Israel's violence. And that's one of the reasons now the Lebanese government is saying they went into these talks with the Israelis thinking the US might control the Israelis, but obviously that's not happening. So a lack of fair mediation by
Mhm.
the United States is a problem. And linked to that
Yeah.
is that the U.S. not only has often mediated between Israel and Hamas or Israel and Hezbollah and now the Lebanese government, but it has, when they reached a ceasefire, the U.S. was supposed to monitor the ceasefire and it has not monitored the ceasefire fairly. So at
Yeah.
every level of this problem, from its inception to mediating a conflict to monitoring a ceasefire, the U.S. has never done it equitably and fairly. And that's because the core problem is that the United States government, not so much the people, the government, for various reasons, doesn't see the people of Lebanon or the people of Palestine as people who have the same
Yeah.
rights as the Israelis. And this happens now at this level of devastation because before the Israelis and the United States enabling Israel carried out the genocide in Gaza, they carried out a silent genocide against international law on human rights protections and the covenants and conventions and
Mhm.
rules
Mhm.
that used to govern global human rights
Which has
protection.
all been dissembled. It's been completely dismantled.
This
And the
man,
result is that we're back in the law of the jungle.
that's
Um,
right. And this is why Israel does what it wants and gets away with it.
right.
And finally, the last point I'd make is the inordinate focus on Hezbollah only. And Hezbollah has many things we can complain, like Hamas. I just co-edited a book on Hamas with Helena Cobban, you probably know, who's a old-time Lebanon expert, lived there many years. Helen and I co-edited a book called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. So, people like Hamas and people like Hezbollah, we can criticize them for many things, and we should criticize them, but we should criticize everybody else for the same things that they do that shouldn't be done. But we should not misunderstand. We should not ignore why these groups come into being, and it's critically important for people to look at Hezbollah and ask, not just why are they fighting, but why are they being able now? Hezbollah and Iran by themselves have almost single-handedly checked the American-Israeli advance in the Middle East militarily for the moment. We don't know what the future is going to hold. This is unprecedented action.
Let me stop you here because I want to go to Maya for a minute. Thank you, Rami, so much. Um, Maya, the I want you to both preview where we're going in the coming weeks, but also to comment on something. I always, used to argue during the Civil War that Lebanon was like a vacant lot, where regional and global powers picked sides and fought their battles in Lebanon, right? The Soviets had theirs, the Americans had theirs, the French had theirs, the British had theirs, the Israelis had theirs, the Syrians had theirs, etc. Everybody had somebody playing for them with their uniform on going into the fight. That hasn't changed. And it's playing out now. And the disturbing part, I think, that we were talking about with Ralph and with Rami is that those divisions have come here in a real sense. And so we do have, Trump has Lebanese in his decision-making group. They're on one side, but there are too many Lebanese not represented in this, and that only creates the friction and the fracture of the country, and doesn't move us forward. How do we move forward on that? You come from Dearborn, you come from a village in South Lebanon, that is being occupied, was occupied for more than 2 decades and is now being occupied again. Talk about that perspective and what that means, and how do we establish the equal humanity of all groups of Lebanese to put aside the foreign groups that
Yeah.
adopt us and recognize they have a game to play, but we're the victims of their game. We're not the beneficiaries of it.
Yeah, no, that's I very much appreciate that. And I come from Lebanon before I came from Dearborn, right? So like there
Yes.
is a and it's the challenge for us, I think, at this time is that in some ways, Jim, this is the conversation you've had before, which is that folks have imported the dynamics of they're here in a way that we saw decades ago, and it's resurfacing now in a way that I think is really very problematic. Um, I, I appreciate everything that Ralph and Rami both said, and you've said, highlighting who may have Trump's ear, who may not, who's able to influence, who can talk to a Republican senator, who wants to occasionally pound a table about Lebanon. And I honestly, I take this all very, very seriously. I just struggle with the idea that policymaking in this country right now is being made because Joe Rogan decided to send a text to Donald Trump and then they have a signing ceremony in the White House. And if that's the context in which part of this conversation needs to be had, then I want to fall back on what are the values that we're attempting to put forward? Because the sequencing is off, right? If you come to this conversation and you exclusively talk about Hezbollah disarmament, which I think we can all agree that an entity within a larger state existing like that is not sustainable, and has to be addressed. But if that's what you talk about, and then you surface normalization with Israel as the second priority, but yet for decades, I mean, for decades, the US Lebanese bilateral relationship has been very real. Americans actually have some understanding or connection to Lebanon in a very real way. Certainly a product of the fact that the first wave of immigrants that came here to this country were from what was then, Syria, greater Syria, but certainly Lebanese. And that continues to be such an important element of this community. So people connect to Lebanon in a different way. Without a doubt, we lost our horizon in Gaza. There's no question. The genocide means that Israel can act with complete impunity and no accountability. And when they tell you we're applying the Gaza model to the south of Lebanon, that is what we're seeing play out. But what has to happen for us, including because I can have debates with people who want to, say, I'm going to push for this or push for that. What you have to actually come back to is if your objective is Lebanese sovereignty and Lebanese economic well-being, then you have to bring the conversation back to we have to support Lebanese institutions. And that includes the government. And that includes the current government that was highly supported by the United States, who helped put them in place. That includes support for the Lebanese armed forces, which arguably is the only sound institution in the entire country. So when those who are attempting to influence this administration are talking to you about a Trump ecosystem and what the traffic will bear on that, but then they're doing it in such a way that isn't about Lebanon, and the US Lebanese historical relationship, then I think this is where we get into the problems of who is speaking for whom with regards to Lebanon. And I think we have to step back from that piece of it. I don't disagree with Ralph's point about the need for people to have meetings with officials in this administration. I would just bring it back, though, to the fact that some of that has not panned out. We have given Lebanon policy to Israel in this administration. That is what's happened. And when they talk about normalization, I would suggest the normalization we're looking at is more like the Syria model than it is like the Egypt model. And that's of deep, deep concern for any of us who care about Lebanon. To your point about voices and the diversity of voices, Lebanese American community continues to actually be, I think, incredible, just like the majority of the people in Lebanon are incredible. We saw that when the 1.2 million people were displaced. And while the occasional bad story will percolate more than something that's good, the majority of the people have been standing together to say, this is not going to work. You mentioned my personal village, Tibneen. It's actually, given the way, I mean, blue lines, red lines, yellow lines, this particular one where it's not currently under the occupation, but the last remaining hospital in all of the South for its population there is in Tibneen, and it was bombed during the most recent activity. So the doctors did not leave, just like they did not leave in Gaza. The kind of targeting of the journalists that we're seeing, if anyone at all has any doubt for what we're dealing with in terms of Israeli actions there, we need to look at the case of Amma Khalil, the most recent incident. In my mind, that's Shireen Abu Akleh all over again. But you have here a span of 7 hours where she was left. And we didn't have a Lebanese government step up. We didn't have the Lebanese Red Cross step in to be able to prevent it from happening. And I think those are the kinds of things that we can hear, because we don't have to compromise our values, right? Like there are officials that have to do these meetings with this administration and attempt to kind of negotiate from a place of weakness. As Arab Americans, as Lebanese Americans, as Palestinian Americans, we actually don't have to approach it that way. We have every right to continue to say there are US laws in place that do not allow for what Israel is doing right now. And therefore, we should not allow these weapons transfers to continue. And just the final point I would make is that we cannot allow the destabilization model that's been applied in other countries in the Arab world to kind of play out in Lebanon here. And I say that as like full stop. It can't be we destabilize below the Litani and everything else is great. That's not going to work. And I think the majority of Lebanese don't want that. And I think the majority of Lebanese Americans don't want that. So it's about trying to advocate for values normalization, meaning like Lebanese sovereignty. And that's the other point, finally. I'm sorry. Lebanon is a much freer society than, say, Egypt. Our press is not going to allow for this kind of stuff to happen the way that it has. Civil society exists the way that it does. Universities and think tanks are in place the way that they are. It's not going to play out the same way. And I think the devastation of a 15-year civil war is the reason that you have Lebanese saying, no, we're not going to do this. But I continue to worry about what the U.S. is advancing and pushing for.
Maya, just one thing. I want to go to Rami for a second and Ralph, but walk people through the next few weeks.
Yeah, part of the conversation we're having today is to make sure that people discuss Lebanon and understand it because of the reason it's being ignored. And the most important piece of it from our perspective is what we're doing next Thursday, this week on, which is people that are directly impacted from the villages in the south. So we're launching this Thursday with someone from Anmun. And one of the Majra'iyun, one of the other villages that's there. I apologize for not remembering them, but if you all, Arnoun and Al-Kaya, if you recall the priest who said, I will not leave my village, and he was killed, we will have someone with us who he actually married, her and her husband. And they're going to be part of the conversation to just talk about what's actually happening on the ground. Next week, we'll do Bintish Vale and Nabatiyah.
Okay, and we're going to continue because we want to bring those faces to all of you. Rami, I remember I got to give the Clinton people, when they first came in, Warren Christopher was meeting with Rafiq Hariri, and they asked me to help with the speech. And I gave him this line that for decades the U.S.-Lebanon relationship has been based on the Lebanese American community. And as I reflect on it today, the problem is that that community is so divided. Our community is so divided. I can speak about that we can say we got Tom Barak in the administration. We've got the Boulos family in the administration. We've got them in the administration, but they represent a view, and there are too many voices who are not reflected in that, and that's part of the problem where we are. There's some people who think this is just great. We're just doing really well here. But there's a longer view. I mean, remember when Israel occupied South Lebanon for over 2 decades? What did it do? It didn't make the situation better, it made it worse. Um, and this is going to make it worse. This is not going to get rid of resistance. This is going to accentuate resistance because people are not going to tolerate. And, when I hear that I have my complaints about Hezbollah, my complaints about Hamas, and my complaints about lots of different things. But when I see a story in the paper and it said that Hezbollah attacked Israeli forces in South Lebanon. No, wait. These are people attacking people who are invading and occupying their country and destroying the homes in their country. That perspective isn't there. And I don't know what we do to develop that sense of shared grievance about what is happening, that it's not working. Like when in 82, Israel was bombing West Beirut, and people were sitting on their porches in East Beirut and watching the bombs go and cheering them. We had to bring kids here because they couldn't cross the line into East Beirut to get hospital treatment. We had to bring them here to the States for it. What do we do with that? You've been in Lebanon for long enough to have a sense of the pulse. Can we change that dynamic? Can we create the Lebanon that Khalil Gibran wrote about?
Well, that unified solidarity-based national Lebanese sentiment is there. I felt it many times, especially during the decade of uprising, 2010 to 2020. I was in Beirut. I attended most of the demonstrations, and it was quite
Hmm.
extraordinary. And so that spirit is there. The problem is that the political leaderships
Hmm.
have not been able to capitalize on it because most of them are linked to external forces. Um, Now, the Saudis are trying now some kind of initiative to bring together the three prime ministers, the head of parliament, the prime minister, and the president, who represent three main factions, to get them together. And they're trying to get the Egyptians involved. And the Turks and the Qataris. So external involvement might be a way to do this because Lebanon by itself, in its current situation, facing off in a room with the US and Israel is going to be gobbled up and shredded. They don't have a chance to get anything better than, be like the old May, whatever it was, May 13,
Hmm.
19, what was it called? The one back with the um, after the 1982 invasion. Um, the the Lebanese have to figure out a way to have a unified system with a government that serves all Lebanese. And this has never really existed, even in the early years in the 50s and 60s. The Shiite in the south and the rural areas were in the north were not at all addressed. So but the majority of Lebanese want to have this system that serves the whole country and therefore defends the whole country. And this is not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's going to happen only with serious external support as well, that is managed in a way that serves all the Lebanese, not just certain political leaders. It's a big uphill struggle, but it has to happen eventually for the country to fully get through this situation and flourish the way that we know it can flourish, because there's been so many amazing examples of
I,
Lebanese.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, I know you're right. I know when the Israelis said that the Christians could come back, but the Shia couldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
There were Christian villages who took in the Shia. I mean, there was a sense of solidarity there. The question is how to elevate that solidarity to a political force like we saw in the period in 2000, I think it was 17, 18, when the revolts were happening on the street and they were completely non-sectarian. It was just brilliant to watch.
Oh, yeah, that was
Ralph, I want to, Jenny, could you, I see Yusuf El Zain has submitted an op-ed that he wrote in the Dayton newspaper, and I like Yusuf so much, and I had a great time with him and some of the folks in the community there when I went out um, to uh, to Dayton. Could you put his op-ed in the Q and in the I'm sorry in the chat so people could see it? And Ralph, back to you. If
Let's talk about who has the lever of power. Uh, Trump is stymied by Iran. Iran says no deal if Lebanon is not included. So Trump has the influence. Let's talk very tactically here, and that is he can tell the Israelis, withdraw from southern Lebanon, stop the bombing, and I'm going to enforce a ceasefire. And he knows how to enforce the ceasefire. Because if he doesn't do that, Iran is going to continue to say, well, there's no deal, but if I'm not mistaken, wasn't this ceasefire, which is being violated all the time, the way the last one was, 10,000 times, as you put in your article, violating the ceasefire the last year? Didn't that come because Trump wanted to take away Iran's excuse of saying it's got to apply to Lebanon? So you gotta always ask the question. When you get press, when you get rallies, when you get this, that, you get visits and so on. To what end? The immediate end is one man can stop the bombing, he can withdraw the troops, and he can enforce the ceasefire. And if there's ever going to be a deal with Iran, that's got to be part of it, and he knows it. He knows it, and he's in a corner with the Strait of Hormuz issue and so on, and he knows that this is the way to do it. But nobody's demanding to meet with him. No, Republicans, high level, ex-military, ex-ambassadors, ex-business, business types. They got to put it in his mind. He listens to the last people he hears. He's not hearing enough in person. He's not a guy who reads the newspapers or op-eds. Or he's got to be in the Oval Office. And you can make very powerful equal time arguments and all the rest. And with Barack and others, they know how to get the appointment and just talk to them. There are people in the State Department who want exactly what I've said done, but they're being obviously circumvented, like the whole Foreign Service is. So the first step is who can make those things happen? And the answer is Trump and Iran. By the way, 6 churches have been bombed in Lebanon in their latest round. I haven't read anything about that. Have you? How many U.S. citizens have been killed? That tends to get his ear. How many U.S. citizens have been killed in the last few years by Israeli bombs or injured? They wiped out a whole American family last year with 3 kids and 2 parents. So that gets his ear. And then you airlift horribly burned kids and amputees to ready and able U.S. hospitals. That tends to get attention and media. And finally, this is just a curious suggestion. What if on one day, Lebanese in prominent positions all over the country had a general strike? What if the physicians at the Cleveland Clinic, which have a lot of Arab potentates as patients, what if people in key places, in universities, businesses, labor unions, etc., just say, okay, we are going to strike one day to get this country to pay attention to our ancestral land and stop its destruction with U.S. weapons and U.S. cover and get out of Lebanon and enforce a ceasefire. So then you get press all over the country because these Lebanese Americans are in very key positions in all over the United States.
Ralph, that's the thing. Ralph had some great ideas, and Rami as well. And what I'd love you to do is email me your reflections on that, one, and two, a kind of not a manifesto. God, that's gotten a bad name after things that have been happening that I don't want to talk about. But we ought to have a charter, a voice for Lebanese Americans across the board, what we agree on. What would be our vision for the future that we want to use to bring people together to say we're not going to allow ourselves to be divided. We're not going to allow one part of Lebanon to be wounded and pretend that the other part of Lebanon is going to be healthy. What is the language we'll use and how will we do it? If you have ideas on either one, strategy, tactics that we use, or this vision of the language we ought to use to bring ourselves together, send it to me at jzogby@aaiusa.org. And I'd love to begin to put it together and see what we come up with.